Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to Black Women Amplified, the podcast. Your host, Monica Wisdom Tyson, brings you downloadable conversations that matter to women around the globe. We discuss all things Black girl magic, amplify our voices, and transform our challenges into triumphs. Monica calls on her League of Extraordinary Women to push our boundaries, share their expertise, and stories of personal transformation. Welcome your host of Black Women Amplified, Monica Wisdom Tyson.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Black Women Amplified podcast. I have a special guest for you today. And before we get into that, I want to give a special dedication to my cousin who transitioned yesterday morning. And if you've heard me talk about her several times, so I just wanted to tell you all about this. She was Maya Angelou's best friend. They lived in Africa together, and her work with W.E.B. Du Bois and Malcolm X is legendary. So she was a huge champion for Black women and a big part of why I do what I do. So I wanted to make sure that I gave her a special lift up and a special greeting to the ancestral world, which is where she is now. So let's get into this conversation with this dynamic woman that is with us today. Two-time author Jayne Allen is a Harvard law grad, a popular speaker, and an experienced business executive. She is a serial entrepreneur and has launched many brands, including a beauty brand on QVC. She is also an accomplished strategist and attorney for global superstars, including Lady Gaga and my forever favorite, Prince. With her vast experience in the executive and entrepreneurial world, this multifaceted powerhouse embarked on a new adventure as a published author. But when the gatekeepers told her no to her writing, her concept, and her characters, Jayne Allen said yes to herself. She published her first novels, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. Building a winning community led her to an impressive 4-book deal with the legendary HarperCollins publishing house through their imprint, Harper Perennial. This deal included her latest novel and second to the trilogy, Black Girls Must Be Magic. How is that for an amplified Black woman? I could go through all of her many accomplishments and accolades, but I'm sure you would rather hear it from her. So let's give us our special guest and new super friend, a Black Women Amplified welcome. Good day, phenomenal woman, Jayne Allen. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that incredible introduction. and my condolences also for your loss, your family member.
Thank you.
Sounds amazing.
She is, and so are you. And she's one of the people who, just a little bit about her, she was an expat, and she went to, when we were going through Jim Crow, she moved to Ghana and built a life there. And that's where she met Maya Angelou, and her journey into all that she did began. And just like her, you are a very adventurous, multifaceted woman. When I was writing your intro, I was like, what do I put in it and what do I leave out?
Oh my goodness.
There's so many different directions, but aren't we as Black women ones who do all the things?
Hopefully we do. That's kind of the call to adventure that I hope is kind of the undercurrent of what I write, is that, we deserve the fullness of life as well, beyond just surviving, and, what does thriving look like? So I hope we spend our time answering that question.
Most definitely. Before we get into all of that, we've been through and we're going through a pandemic. So I just wanted to know, how has the last couple of years impacted you and inspired you?
Well, I think that's a really good way of phrasing that, because it has absolutely been both. And when the pandemic started, I was in the self-published phase of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, and things had started to really build. And I was beginning to have speaking engagements that were in person before this. And they wound up having to be canceled because of obviously the severity of the pandemic. And what that did for me was it inspired me to try to find another way to connect with readers. And so I decided I would meet with book clubs and I would connect with readers online, which I might not have been so actively focused on that if we hadn't had the pandemic. But since we were all at home, and it was just something that helped me feel connected, and it was really enjoyable. And I just loved getting to know readers and hearing about their perspectives from the book. And it really started to build a community around the book and connecting readers to each other around the concepts of the book. So that was definitely something that was inspirational and ultimately led to me meeting my agent and leading to the book deal that happened. What I've also learned is that making new connections and building community is something that you really have to be deliberate about. It's a practice. And, making new connections, reigniting connections that have been lost in the course of the pandemic, because what it's really done is taken us out of community. And that's something that we all really do need. And I think we're probably starting to think about and talk about that now more as this has been progressing.
Right.
So it's really forced me to build a practice around staying connected to people and staying connected to the community that sustains me and keeps my energy going. So it's been challenging. It's absolutely been rough, and it's made me also have to be very aware of mental health and making that a practice also to make sure that that part of me is cared for, and I have to be the one responsible for it.
So let's unpack that a little bit. When in building community, how did you begin that process, and how did you stay focused on that process? Because I know it can be a daunting experience for many. And with you having so much experience in many different areas, I know that you've had to work on building communities for other people. How did you go about building it for yourself?
It started for me, I think, with a genuine interest in wanting to connect with people. And I do think that community starts that way. There has to be some kind of genuine interest and desire to connect, and a genuine passion around the core subject matter, whatever it is. And for me, beyond just what I've been writing, what I'm writing about is the process of finding authenticity, finding one's voice, finding the courage to live on your own terms as a woman, and doing that through the journey of Black women, because the societal constraints that we live under are particular. There's a lot of policing of Black women's bodies, appearances. There's a lot of context and stigma around certain things that we do or that are part of the human experience, but just because it's through our vessel, because it's shaped or shows up at how we show up, for some reason it's vilified. There's something becomes wrong with it from societal standards. So we're not in position. It's really a battle to just live, and to just be. And so I wanted to make this a celebration and an acknowledgement of who we are in spite of, and really amplify that and help people celebrate themselves and each other in that regard, and expand that beyond just Black women, but making our story something that is valuable for everybody to learn from, and really centering our humanity. So that was really something that was important to me personally. And I believe that other people would feel similarly, even if they weren't Black, that just, yes, there's something you learned in life from Black women's particular journey and experience.
Right.
And if we center that humanity, we can all go along with this journey and learn the lessons alongside this person. And then just a genuine love of reading and books. It it was something that you know, my main platform has Instagram, and there's a community there. So it's just participating in those conversations, facilitating conversations, being present for conversations. That has been the starting point, alongside the genuine desire and to connect and having an authentic passion around the subject.
That's amazing. We talk a lot here about self-acceptance, and I feel like the theme of the book, Black Girls Must Be Magic, there was a lot of conversation about your main character, your protagonist, Tabitha, accepting herself from her hair to, I don't want to give away the book. I want people to read it.
Yeah.
But it seems that there was this consistent theme about different situations where she had to reckon with herself about where she wanted to go in her life. I'll just put it that way. And I just wanted to ask a personal question, like, what does that conversation sound like for you in your own life around self-acceptance?
I think it's a continual journey. And I will say with, you know, Tabby, one of the things in writing this book for me that was an important inspiration in a sense is when I would see representation of Black women, a lot of times in contemporary fiction. And this is not all books, but just for what I was seeing and experiencing, a lot of times you see the external representation, the indicators to let the reader know, oh, this is a Black woman, like, oh, just crinkly hair, or, you know, a spunky attitude. And that was just these sort of superficial markers that really didn't give any indication of the individual or the individual's journey. Just for example, if a woman has crinkly hair, a Black woman has crinkly hair, and she has that in her workspace, there's a whole story there about how did she get to that place? Because in society, if you take into account the societal layers, we're told that our natural hair texture, and we've been told that, is unprofessional.
Right.
And we're pressured and conditioned through media and beauty standards. You know, they're evolving, but historically, up to this point, that our crinkly hair or hair texture, you know, our styles are not the beauty standard, and they're not the standard of professionalism. So if a Black woman shows up crinkly hair in a workplace, there is a whole journey. There's a whole story there, you know, an epic story about how she came to that place, if that's what she wanted to do, because, you know, she's had to fight through those layers. So in writing this story, I wanted to show that. I wanted to show the personal journey and the personal courage and fight for authenticity that really is, which is significant if you really are, you know, paying attention to it and you're really acknowledging it. So at the time that I wrote it, I hadn't even gone on that journey myself. I had never worn my natural hair texture to work. And not even saying that you need to or don't. It's all a personal decision. You can be who you want to be, do what you want to do.
Right.
But for me, in part, it was because I did not feel like that was my best self. And so this journey really encouraged me to challenge that within myself and to create a space where I could love myself as I am, just to find the courage to show up authentically, is, you know, embrace my hair texture. Right. Not that I always have to wear my hair in that way, but just that I can, if I want to, and feel comfortable and confident doing that. In the process of this book, I did decide to do that. And it was a journey. It was a little bit harrowing to show up at work for the first time, you know, and like, how is this going to go? And, you know, I posted about it on Instagram. Like, this is the very first day. I have a picture of it. The very first day I showed up with my natural hair, you know, at work. And just, I'll remember that day, you know, and how I felt, gauging people's reactions and feeling very, you know, tenuous about every moment and every meeting, until, you know, years later now, I'm comfortable in this space. I'm comfortable as myself. I can love myself this way. I like myself this way. I've learned to, and I realized it was a practice. So the book, it's been a journey for me as well. and just of a reminder, that the journey of authenticity is important, thriving is important, and that courage, shouldn't go uncelebrated.
And also the courage to show your full self.
Yes.
Instead of the persona that we create to, one, to protect ourselves, and two, to be accepted by society. So the idea that this is who I am, that's a big leap for Black women. I even find it in myself. It's like, okay, who am I going to be today when I walk into this space or this space? And we talk about code switching. And I'm really astounded that we even have to pass a law that allows Black women to keep their hair, wear their hair texture to work without getting repercussions or getting fired. The Crown Act, the first time I heard it, I literally cried. I'm like, are you serious?
Yes. And I think it's only been passed in 11 states, I believe, or an equivalent protection. And the afro has been protected for a while, but it's other protective styles that have not been: dreads, braids, other styles. And I think there's a period in the news where you're saying that people are girls were being sent home from school for wearing their hair in braids, or, a player had to cut their dreads. It's a painful thing to see. Yes. And to realize that, in this year, 2022, we're still fighting this very basic battle. And to just even acknowledge the weight of something like that on a person. It's not like we're, somebody's saying, oh, you're going to go do something outer worldly with your hair. You're not using a bunch of shellac and props. It's literally doing something with your hair that is natural to that texture, that's protective and healthy for that particular texture. And then as a human being, being told that something is faulty or defective about that natural state, there is a weight to that as a people, I think we've been conditioned just to, kind of grin and bear it and move through it. And that strength is, within the community to just push through it. But it's not something that should go unacknowledged. And we need to start, thinking about what kind of self-care practice is going to counteract that, and get to the point where we can say enough. We shouldn't have to bear this, and we don't want to. So that's there's progress that's happening, but I think we're still in the awareness point, and we're still in that space of giving ourselves permission to just say, hey, hold up, this isn't right. And on a human level, this is unfair to me.
Yes.
So,
and it's not okay.
Right. And it's not okay.
And it's not okay. And we have to realize that it's not okay every time we look in the mirror, and that it is okay to be ourselves wherever we are. And we deserve to be in all the spaces as we are.
Yes.
Another theme of the book, a challenge that is just bubbling up to the surface, is the infertility issues of Black women. And when I saw Kamala Harris, our Black female vice president, bring that conversation to the White House, I was just like, my jaw dropped. I had to watch it a couple of times for it to absorb what I was seeing, because this is something we talk about in secret. And so I noticed, of course, when you start the book, you jump right into the conversation.
Yeah.
I didn't read the first book, but I know that that's a part of the conversation in the first book as well. But you jumped right into the conversation, and the conversation is so detailed that I learned a lot about the problem, because my journey to motherhood was I chose not to be a mother. So I never had to deal with those issues. But I learned so much in the first few chapters about Tabitha's journey. And then we get to the plot twist. Woo. I was like, I turned it off, and I was like, now that's a plot twist.
I know. And I wrote that. I was like, readers are going to have something to say about this, but
listeners,
it
you
was
have
fun.
to read it to hear the plot twist. But her journey was so detailed. Is this something that is personal to your life, or is it just something that you wanted to talk about?
It's personal. It became personal to me. So I dealt with fibroids and didn't really understand the impact of fibroids, because the way that, and fibroids disproportionately affect Black women when they still don't know why. And there's not very much research. People don't even know where they come from or anything really about, about fibroids, but they do affect fertility in a significant way. And I've not been married. I've dated, but not gotten married, and have not really focused on family plans in my 30s. So I got to my late 30s and decided to preserve the options, that I may want to take advantage of. I need to at least freeze my eggs. Mm-hmm. So in that process, I had to learn quite a bit about, which nobody had ever talked about this with me. It had never been any conversations with my friends. Mm-hmm. A lot of my friends were still single at that time also, and never gotten married. Some had, some hadn't, but still we hadn't talked about it. It was not a topic of conversation. But once I got into that space of, needing to freeze my eggs and learning how expensive it was, learning that all clinics are not created equal in that regard, learning that it's better to freeze your eggs when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, the younger, the better. But and it's not covered by insurance, just all of those things. Mm-hmm. I wish that it had just been a conversation where, regardless of what you decide you want to do, information is power. This whole issue, this topic of reproductive health, fertility, infertility, is really a war of information and time at this point, and advocacy. And up to this point, as Black women, there's this myth of hyperfertility. We hear, the whole focus is, don't get pregnant, and because the assumption is it's so easy for us, or would be, or will always be. And so this topic needs to be discussed, and it's just starting to come to the forefront. So when I thought about this story and my experience, I decided to write what I wish I had, because when I went to look for topics around this, about what my options could be and the information about it, there was almost nothing in fiction, almost nothing, and so little in the nonfiction space. And I'm talking from documentaries to books to articles to personal accounts. I mean, I really, really took a deep dive. And so the research was already done for this on a personal level for me. And I wanted to put that somewhere so that it could help other people, because I realized that it's just not enough information. At least if the topic is presented in this story, it can start conversations and give permission in spaces that maybe this wouldn't have been discussed before. So that was something that I was hoping, could be served by this book and Tabby's story.
Well, you definitely got it right.
Oh, thank you.
I said, this is very academic. I'm like, this section right here should be taught in schools. Like, that should be a part of sex education. I was like, wait a minute. And,
right?
And how, yes. And how do we normalize this conversation? I remember as a young girl, I'm Generation X. So as a young girl, the conversation around our periods was a non-conversation. I mean, I remember the conversation with my mother, and it was just like, looking back, I was like, that was a horrible conversation.
Right.
And we called it everything but what it was. It was Aunt Flo, or it was, we have companies in town, or it was everything.
Time of the month.
But now
or
it's
the
like,
curse, people call it.
The curse. Yes. Let's not even dig into that part of it.
I know.
But how do we normalize the conversation? Because now we just say it. I'm on my period, or I'm on cycle, or I'm not good right now. I need my power kits. and I'll be in bed. Even men are understanding it now. That's how normal the conversation around our cycle is. How do we normalize the same conversation about the journey of motherhood, pregnancy, infertility, and even the conversation of medical racism? How do we bring that into like everyday conversation?
I think it starts with stories. Yeah, I think it starts with story, with sharing stories, with giving, something like this where it doesn't have to touch on any particular person personally. So that personal privacy risk is not there, although I don't mind sharing my story. But Tabitha, I'm so thankful to Tabitha as a character because I'm able to put her in position and just put her out there. And she does for us what, we need somebody to do for us, which is just be vulnerable and candid and put it all out there in that way and sharing in her life in that way. And sometimes I'm like, oh, sorry, girl, when I'm throwing, plot twists at her, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, because I really do like you, but we need the story to go here. So, but I think it starts with sharing stories. And I've seen in reading groups and book clubs, discussion groups, women in reading this story, they get into the space of starting to share themselves. And I remember one woman shared that she's dealing with, I believe it was PCOS or it was something like that. I think it was PCOS, but she had never voiced that out loud and never shared that with anyone. And she said, well, no one had ever shared it with me. So I didn't feel like I had the safe space or the space to share what I've been going through. And she literally broke down in tears just to be able to have that moment of being in community, and everybody supported. And then other people started to share. And it's just that something, having a story that can inspire sharing of other stories. And I think it starts there. And then people begin to normalize that conversation. And it doesn't seem to be something, because I've talked to people about it. When people ask me, what do you do? I say, I'm an author. What's your book about? And I talk about, Tabby and Tabby's journey. She's dealing with an infertility issue, the crisis that sets off the story and kind of unravels her seemingly perfect life. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I'm in a very deep conversation with a stranger who will share with me, this has happened, multiple times, that they're dealing with an infertility issue and they've never seen it in fiction before, but and to feel less alone is something in and of itself. So I hope that people start to feel more comfortable sharing their own stories and that, and sharing information, because that's also part of it. Every doctor's not equal in this journey. Every, clinic's not equal. So we just really need to be talking about it. We really need to be sharing information, and we really need to have community where we can find support, with other people in the journey so that we know we're not alone.
How can, and I want you to put your legal hat on for me, how can we be better advocates for ourselves within the medical system? Because the one thing was highlighted in the pandemic is that it's definitely not equal for Black people and others. Mm-hmm. So how do we advocate for ourselves?
Well, I don't even know if that requires a legal hat, but I will say that studies are now starting to show that the experience of Blackness, the societal experience of Blackness, actually creates stress and physical considerations that are unfairly borne by Black people. We're just starting to say that. It's like, oh, really? Is that a surprise? Okay.
You could have just asked me, hello, Black lady.
I know, but it's about the validation of our experience. And I think realizing, yes, somebody could ask you, but would they believe it? And will they believe you? And will they believe what you're saying? And that's a lot of what we hear and we've heard about, outcomes, unfortunate outcomes in medicine, where people, I think Serena Williams was saying, even for her, she went in and said, look, I know something's wrong. And it's discounted. Our personal accounts of pain, our, personal accounts of of what's going on in our bodies are just not believed. And so having someone to help advocate for us, like that's why in the story it was important for Tabby to have a doula. And I wanted to show that experience. So Tabby, I'm giving her that, I'm assuming that I'm projecting that onto her as a character, but assuming that she would afford herself of what would be the most likely resources for a healthy outcome and one of those things is having a doula who amplifies, whose part of that role is to amplify the voice of the mother and the mother's wishes in that journey, whatever, the journey of pregnancy, to have the most healthful journey and the journey that she wishes to have for herself. So sometimes it's about having amplification there and affording yourself of that resource. And there's community resources for doulas if people are experiencing pregnancy, but also knowing that you can vote with your feet too. When you, if you're in a practitioner and they don't acknowledge your, you or what you're saying, or they're steamrolling you, that's not normal. I think we are conditioned to believe, okay, well, the doctor knows best. And so I'm willing to show up here and be steamrolled. No, you have your choice. You can go to a different practitioner. And so that's sort of a personal responsibility and something to internalize, that you have the right to advocate for yourself. You have the ability to make a different choice of a doctor or practitioner. You should be heard. So it's also about setting a different standard of expectation within our community of what the quality of care should be.
100%. I love everything that you just said, because now people are talking about their experiences with doctors. No shade on doctors, but there's a practice, and it's historic, that they don't believe that Black women feel pain the same way that other women feel. And the fact that they tested our bodies without anesthesia just to develop modern medicine. It's that institutionalized racism is deep within the medical field, just like it is everywhere else. And I think, just like you said, we have to be able to get up and leave right. and find somebody. We have to have the courage and the insight to get up and leave and move on to the next doctor who will be there for us and our child. And I love in this book that you talked about doulas, because midwifing is an ancient practice around the world. And I remember a friend of mine went to Belgium. She's born in Belgium, but she lived in America, and I met her. I went over there when she had her baby there. And I'm saying this because I want American women to know that this is not normal. In Belgium, they were allowed to stay in the hospital for a month if they chose. They had an assistant and they had a doula that would be with them for the full 30 days, either at the hospital or in their home. So it was already built into the hospital system. And so she was able to have a beautiful birthing experience with her first child. And it was incredible for her. She was like, if I ever have a baby again, I'm going back to Belgium.
Right. Well, it sounds like that sounds like maybe
I'm like, I guess we're all right.
I know. Okay. Yeah.
But I think another way to advocate is to make sure that you do have a doula, somebody there with you to help you through, one, the whole process of pregnancy, and two, to make sure that you're able to ask the right questions. So I love that conversation is in this book, because I got excited. Because that's another thing that people just, whisper among each other.
Right.
But we need to make it a big, loud noise that these are options for us to have beautiful pregnancies. So let's talk about the book, because not only was Tabitha having a baby, but there's a man named Mark.
Right.
There's a man named Mark that she don't want to give too much, but it's an interesting dynamic to see how the two of them relate. And there's a point in the book that is so tender between the two of them towards the end of the book that I was just like, wait a minute. Were you like the rest of us watching Bridgerton on Netflix? Because
of course I watched Bridgerton.
The scene was so tender and so beautifully written. I was just like, I want more of this. I need your next book to be a romance novel, because it was so beautifully written. And it was, to see the inner thoughts of a Black man was just so beautiful, because it's something that we see, when we're with our guys, but it's not a conversation in society.
Yeah. I really love the relationship between Tabitha and Mark. And in the first book, I didn't know where it was going to go, and it's still evolving. But the way that I wanted to think about this was that here are these two people who have their own issues. And in the beginning of the story, in the first book, before Tabitha's life starts to unravel, it's fine. They're perfect for each other on paper. They don't spend that much time together. So there's the ish hasn't hit the fan between them. They're not at the level of depth or complexity where they run into each other's trauma and issues. And in a lot of relationships and adult relationships, and especially with traumatized people, which we are, once the trauma hits, once you hit that place, people become incompatible, because it's unhealed trauma, it's undealt with. And the way that it's experienced between the two of them is, oh, you're just not the right person for me. And then they give up on each other. And sometimes it's just best to separate, because there's no way, they don't have the tools and there's no way forward. What I wanted to see in this story, and what was interesting to me to write, was what about if these two people don't give up on each other? They don't have to, and then what does that look like? And so it's a different kind of romance. It's a different kind of space, because in the first book, they love each other, but they're like kind of playing it at it. It's like a scene unfolding on a stage or something. They're doing the act of it, but they're not in it, and they're not in the space of it, and they're not building that connection. So as the story progresses, and even through the first book, when they start encountering challenges, and they have every reason to separate, but then they still stay connected in one way or another through, in the first book, when Tabby really goes through it, he still shows up. And so they're actually building a friendship. They're building this relationship. And so in the second book, it becomes something so much deeper than this person is perfect for me on paper, or these are your superficial, your checklist attributes, but this is why I'm in your life. Mm-hmm. And now I'm starting to think about the sacrifices I'm willing to make and the growth that I need to undertake to be not just who I need to be, but who I need to be who you need me to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's this place I don't think we really get to see very much in relationship, and especially from the perspective of a Black man. And I wanted to show that with Mark, because I think a lot of readers have a very complex relationship with Mark. and especially coming in the first book, he's not the favorite character, but but he's not, I don't write him. He's not a villain. And so he's not villainized. He's just depicted. But he also is allowed to grow, and he's working at it. He's trying. So I think his journey is just as important as everyone else's in the book, including Tabby's.
I could definitely see him. And in this book, I do see a lot of growth within him and with him as her pregnancy progresses. And it was beautiful to see, because it's seeing, like I said, the inner workings of a Black man's soul, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. which was beautiful to see on paper, because either they're over sexualized or they're over gangsterized. And to see the truth of who they are, I think it just humanized them in such a special way. And I really, really appreciate you writing that the way that you did. And I noticed that Tabby, as you call her, as she's called in the book, she has a lot of boxes that she's kind of breaking through in her life, as we all do. Mm-hmm. And, from her pregnancy to relating to her friends. And one piece that was interesting was the relationship she has with her mother, how mm-hmm. she it seems like a very complicated relationship that you touched on. Did you talk about it more in the first book?
The first book, yeah.
Okay.
The backstory there, and you kind of have a sense of why her mother's the way that she is, and kind of the issues that she's dealing with. So she is a sort of generational representation. And then, she has, the parents were divorced, and her father married his mistress. So that you find that out relatively early in the first book. It's not a spoiler, but so you kind of have a sense of why that relationship is complex. And, but her mom is also, struggling through this. And because of Tabby's decisions, her mom is being forced to grow as well and make some adjustments. And so that is, it's not the traditional mother-daughter relationship. Tabby's closest relationship is really with her grandmother, because her mom moved away when she was younger and she was in middle school. So there's a complexity there, but there's growth, and I think there has to be complexity for there to be growth within the trajectory of the story. So you're not going to read, if the relationship was perfect, it'd be kind of a boring book. Right. So I want to keep people engaged and interested in where these characters go. So they need to have some room to grow.
Yes. Now I feel like I have to go back and read the first book, because this is definitely a full trilogy. I just wanted to also touch on, I felt like the conversation with her mom was also Tabby talking to the world about this is who I am. Mm-hmm. Because her internal conversation was a conflict of how to tell her mother what was going on. And I also felt like it was like telling the world, hey, I'm a Black girl. I'm complicated. I'm not a monolith. And this is who we are. So I just felt like there was a dual conversation happening. Were you aware of that? Or did you put that in the book? Or am I just like surprising you with that idea?
I hadn't really thought about it, but when I was writing, there's a scene in the first book actually where Tabby, and her grandmother is white, and she's talking to her grandmother in the first book about they're asking each other, what does it feel like to be the race that society has assigned you? And it was such a big concept that I was thinking, I couldn't wait to write the scene. And I also it was the scene I was most afraid to write, because I was like, oh my gosh, how do I get to this place? But I didn't want to internalize the pressure of feeling like, because it's such an unusual conversation to have, that it needed to be the conversation reflective of every Black person and every white person. And I reminded myself, it's just these characters. I just have to voice this conversation for these particular two people from their particular perspective. And so I took that pressure off of myself, that wasn't speaking to the world. It was a perspective, and it just happened to be an under-discussed topic. So, it was one perspective of many that I hope proliferate. I hope that there are many, many conversations and many different perspectives and many ways that this is voiced after, because it should be. And so when it comes to Tabby and, her speaking with her mom and finding words to voice those perspectives, I still always write it from what I think is authentic to Tabby. It's just that sometimes maybe these things we don't often voice. And so her words might touch upon some people's unvoiced perspectives.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. You were born to be a writer. If you didn't know that before, I'm just telling you now, you were born to be a writer. That was beautiful. Like, I want you to write that down and publish it. But it was, thank you. Now, in the continuing the conversation of boxes, you yourself have been in many rooms and a diverse background. What boxes did you have to break down in your own life to put yourself in rooms with Lady Gaga and QVC? And you're going to have to tell me a Prince story before you get off this. And the almighty Prince, who you said helped you develop yourself as an artist. What boxes did you have to break down within yourself?
Well, I started out as a lawyer, which is pretty conventional, but along the way, deciding first, okay, I want to go into the music industry, for example. And there's this conventional path that you're told you have to follow with the law, with being an attorney. You go to a firm for 2 years and then maybe you can get a job at a record company. And everybody told me that this was the way that it went. But for me, in my spirit, it just did not feel like that was my path. I did not want to go. I did not want to spend 2 years in my life somewhere I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be at a law firm doing something I didn't want to do. And I thought to myself, I've spent my whole life doing what I don't want to do. I am a master at delayed gratification. Okay. I've studied, I eat my vegetables first. I got the good grades. I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to great schools. I got great grades. And here I am at, this place. And you're telling me I still am not enough to do what I want to do or go where I want to go. And so I just had my enough moment at that point. I made it all the way to Harvard Law School and you're telling me I still have to do this other stuff. And I'm like, enough. No, I'm not doing that. And so I remember it was my second year of law school and 9/11 had happened at the beginning of my second year. But I found myself in a moment just on my sofa in my living room and thinking forward I was thinking about life in general. I was thinking forward about life and thinking through, this is what this looks like. You go and I had a permanent offer at that time for a law firm from when I graduated. And I was like, you go to this firm, you make this money at a certain point and here's your life, but it's very frenetic and you're always working and I know what that looks like already. I can look at a whole bunch of examples and I don't want to take a path that doesn't look happy, doesn't make me feel joy. And so I asked myself a very important question. If that's not going to make you happy, what will? I never asked myself that, just with real agency. Like I am going to ask myself this and it is going to be meaningful to me. What do you want? What will make you happy? And so sitting there and giving myself permission to dream, basically, I started to envision a life for myself and I was naming what would make me happy. And at that time, I wanted to be at a small record company. I didn't want to be in New York or LA. I wanted to be in a smaller market city. And it unfolded for me. And so that was a big moment of that. And lo and behold, that's what wound up happening. A couple of things happened, but I met someone who was starting a record company, wound up getting a job with them through a few different, that's another story for a different day. That's a long story. But I wound up, because I had dreamed of it and allowed myself to dream of it, I was able to recognize it when the opportunity presented itself and say yes to the alternative path that it took my life down, basically. And so there had just been some other decision point moments where I knew I was going to have to do something and make a decision at that time that was counter to what was safe and what was established. But what was safe and what was established, I knew at that decision time was not going to bring me joy and was not going to make me feel fulfilled. So I was able to make that alternative choice into kind of a little bit of the unknown and the darkness. That's how I wound up leaving, the record company that I was working at. I had a fabulous executive position and decided I was leaving because I'd been there 4 years and it was time for something new. And that's how I wound up working with Lady Gaga. And then I was there for a year, started my own company after that, and wound up having this opportunity to work with Prince. And I didn't even know that was what was being presented to me at the time, but something told me to say yes when I almost said no. And then, it wound up being that. And it was definitely a journey into the unknown. And I had no idea how that all came together, but it was something that I had dreamed of. If you had asked me before that, who's the one artist you'd want to work with or learn from, I would have said Prince. And I would have told you, but I know that's impossible, but that's my dream. And then all of a sudden it happened.
Okay, you have to give us one Prince story.
One Prince story. Okay. Well, there was a time I traveled with him when he had The View. And so I'd never been on a private plane before. And he's like, well, we're going to go to New York. I was in Minnesota. I was in Minneapolis. And he said, okay, well, we're doing The View, and he's spoken we, not I. So he's like, we want you to come to New York. Which is really I, but he said we. So just that probably would sound confusing if I didn't qualify that. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, so this is like a Sunday, we went, the rest of the team, his manager and I went to get something to eat, and the hours are passing. And so eventually it's like 9:30. I'm like, what's going on? I didn't know. I was like, what flight is going to New York at like 9:30 at night? Like, I'm like thinking to myself, what is this? So we wind up, we go to get him. We're headed to the airport. Now it's like almost 10 o'clock, I think, or I don't even know. And we wind up going to pass the normal terminal, and we're on this flight. We get out, we go up to this plane, and I'm sitting in the plane. It's just me, him, and his manager. And the door, literally, he walks in, the door closes behind him. I'm on the plane. I'm like, send a quick message to my mom. Like, I'm on the plane with Prince. Nobody knows I'm here, but we're headed to New York. And so I was like, somebody needs to know I'm up here. But anyway, fast forward, we do New York, and we sneak in I stayed at the Ritz-Carlton. We sneak in through the lobby, no security. Nobody knows. Nobody saw that, the elevator's there. We brushed through the lobby, and I'm handed my room key, and we're whisked up directly on the elevator. The elevator makes no stops, of course. But, I was like, I remember seeing people sitting in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton when we walked in. I'm like, nobody realizes that Prince just walked in. And I'm like part of the entourage of this. And I'm like, oh my God. But
people couldn't feel the energy shift.
I would have thought, I was like, nobody knows this is happening. Like, oh my gosh. So it was, but I had no idea it was like that. This is how things go. So it was a real shift of my world on its axis. But anyway, when we were going back, so we were coming back late to Minneapolis from New York, and we were going to Chicago maybe the next day. So now it's like midnight. We land in Minnesota, and we're in the car, and he's like, well, I really wanted to do a performance before we go to Chicago. And now it's 11 o'clock at night in Minneapolis. I'm like, I was like, yeah, it would be, it would be nice if we could have. That's what I think I said. He didn't say anything to me. He just sitting there. He has sunglasses on. He didn't say anything. So we get back to Paisley, and he still didn't say anything to me, whatever. And so the band's packing up because they were in rehearsals. And I'm like, oh, everybody's leaving. I thought whatever. And the women of the band, when they're in the restroom, putting on makeup. I'm like, I thought everybody was going back to the hotel, that everybody stayed in, I think it's an Old Country Inn is what it was called, in Chanhassen, down the road from people that visit Paisley. They'll know that place. and the breakfast buffet, or whatever, they serve breakfast. There's everybody stayed at the Old Country Inn. So I thought everybody was going back to the hotel. And they're putting on makeup. I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, oh, and then it dawned on me oh my God, we're about to do a show. Where are we about to do a show? Because I'm like, they're packing up. They're not doing it on the sound stage at Paisley. So I hop in a car with his manager. I was like, oh, let's take a ride. We're gonna go downtown. So we wind up at First Avenue. The band takes the stage. We get there 5 minutes later. The band actually takes the stage. And then I find myself sitting at a two-top with Prince. Prince is sitting next to me. He's like, yeah, so what do you think? He didn't say anything until that moment. I was just like, oh, it's great. You know, and I felt silly because I was like, here I am thinking that there's things that are impossible. And I'm like, I'm rolling with Prince. There's nothing that's impossible.
Right.
And so he was like always trying to instill that. Like I'd say something like, and then he would just be like, okay, so now what? You know, and I'm like, okay. So, you know, anything's possible, but it did shift my thinking. Like, you know, so I don't think in terms of impossible in the same way. And so those were some really good lessons. And it was really a blessing to be able to spend time in his space like that.
So we can honestly say Prince unlocked your Black girl magic.
Yes, I will say that. Absolutely. And I had no idea that I was going to write a book like this, or that I was even going down this path. He must have known in some way, which I find, you know, I wish I could have that conversation, because I had no idea why we would have some of the conversations we were having, or why he would be trying to clearly instill some of the lessons that he was trying to instill. I'm like, I'm a corporate person, you know, I'm a business person. Like, right. I'm not going down this path of artistry. So why are we talking about this? And I never understood. And then all of a sudden these things unfolded, and I was just like, could he see the future?
I think he created the future.
Maybe so.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I'm sitting over here trying not to laugh out loud, but I'm holding all of my emotions in, because, you know, with all of us, especially Generation X, he's had such a big impact on our life. And what a beautiful experience to be able to work with him on such a close level. Yes. And you talked that into existence. So congratulations on understanding your magic, even when you didn't.
Thank you. Yes. We do have that magic within us.
So you are on your way to part 3 of the trilogy. Mm-hmm. When can we expect that?
Early 2023. So we're targeting February 2023.
And your book deal is for 4 books. Will the 4th book be a memoir and include more Prince stories?
No, we haven't gotten there yet. The 4th book, this has been coming up over and over about the memoir concept. So I think that's probably going to happen soon. So yes, let's put that in the universe. There will be a memoir, but the 4th book is not scheduled to be that. The 4th book is fiction. And it is a story. It's a swap story. A Black woman from Chicago is running from reality. She has a recently ended engagement just before the holidays and doesn't want to tell her family. So she's got to escape the holidays. And there's a white woman, very sheltered, younger artist who's been ensconced in Malibu. And she's very much down on her luck. And she, because of other circumstances, has to rent her house out. So that house becomes the escape for our friend in Chicago. And the woman in Malibu goes and spends the holidays with her family. And it just becomes a very interesting kind of fish out of water story for both of them, figuratively and literally, because our friend from Chicago winds up surfing. So there's Black girl surfing in this story.
Oh my God.
And all kinds of adventures for both of them. That's just been such a joy to conceptualize. So I'm excited for that book. It's it's outside of the Black girls universe. But there's still Black girl magic in the story. And I guess some white girl magic too. And
just girl power magic.
All kinds of magic, and some fish out of water magic, and some surfing magic. So I'm really excited for that 4th book, and more to come. But and evidently there's a memoir on the way, because this just keeps popping up. So I'm paying attention.
So that'll be book number 6, and then after that will be the movies.
Yes, that is in the works too. That is in the works too. So I'm really excited for that.
I am so excited about your journey, and I'm so happy that you came to share your world with us. How can our tribe find you across the interwebs?
the interwebs. I am most frequently on Instagram, Jayne Allen Writes, JayneAllen Writes. And I also have a mailing list. So my website's janeallen.com. You can sign up for my mailing list there. I do not send out frequent emails. I need to send more emails. People are like, can you please let me know about your events? I'm like, I posted on Instagram. So
I think it's time for us to force the world to get into Gen X world. We don't tell everything.
I know. I'm like, I know. So I need to send more emails. So people just know if they're signing for my email list. I'm actually going to send you too few emails, but
yes,
we're working on that. And so those are the best places to find me. I'm Jayne Allen said on Twitter, but I just rarely tweet. So I'm not there often, but I think between those two places, JayneAllen.com. So between my website and Instagram, we will be linked.
Well,
and my books.
Of course. You want to get the trilogies, the first two parts. Start with part one. Don't start in the middle like I did. Because I feel like a lot of my questions would have been answered if I started in part one. But now you get to go back and read them. I think some people who started with book two are happy to find out there's a book one. So there's more to read. And then there'll be a book three. But it's so beautifully written that it does stand on its own. But so I can't wait to get to part three. And I just really want to thank you for your time, for sharing your heart, for being so open with us. And I look forward to our next conversation. You are welcome here anytime. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Black Women Amplified podcast. And of course, you can find us on Instagram, as well as anywhere that you hear your podcasts, preferably Apple or Good Pods. Thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you the next time. Love and light. I'm Monica Wisdom, and I am out.
Thank you for listening to Black Women Amplified. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe and log on to blackwomenamplified.com for more information. Keep shining.